Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for listening to this talk. My name is Guy Midgley. I'm a professor at Stellenbosch University, where I head up the Global Change Biology Lab. And in this talk, I present the results of an MSc that was completed by Amy Edwards, in which she quantified the growth response of Eriocephalus ericoides, a widespread shrub of the Nama Karoo, to experimental warming. Dr. Nikki Stevens was Amy's co-supervisor. And I'd also like to thank Dr. Justin du Toit, especially for assisting us at Grootfontein throughout the period of Amy's study. In this opening slide, you see the experimental paddock at Grootfontein, Middelburg, where the work was carried out. And in the foreground, you see these open-top chambers, which I'll speak more about later. This paddock is grazed or browsed at the recommended rate and has been for some years. And as you can see, it's a typical shrub grass co-dominated vegetation type of the area. Eriocephalus ericoides is one of the most common species at this site. Some background to start. I think by now most of us are more than aware of the ongoing rise in temperature due to the human influence on the climate, and what looks like the early signs of shifts in rainfall patterns occurring globally and in South Africa. In 2014, McKellar et al. Published this paper in South African Journal of Science, showing an analysis of trends in rainfall and air temperature over the 6 decades, from 1960 to 2010. This revealed highly significant warming trends throughout the country, but much less clear trends in rainfall. The symbols in these figures indicate the direction of change, and their size indicates the magnitude of the trend. The filled-in symbols are significant at the 95% level. Middelburg is in Zone 5 in the southeast and is clearly an area of warming, but the rainfall trends in this area are far less clear. However, Justin du Toit at Grootfontein has used the long-term rainfall data at this site to analyze the data for potential shifts in rainfall seasonality. And his analysis, interestingly, shows what seems to be a shift in seasonality towards a more early summer rainfall peak, but no long-term trends in the amount of rain. You see this early summer rainfall peak here after 1990. What are the future projections? As shown in this map, I've downloaded from this really excellent CSIR portal that's referenced below. It's likely that this area of the Karoo could see warming of between 2 and 2.5 degrees by the end of the century, even under mid-range emission scenarios. So this is not under high emission scenarios. These would be scenarios in which the world, to at least some extent, is able to reduce its fossil fuel emissions. So this is somewhere north of 1 to 1.5 degrees of further warming on top of what we've already experienced in the Eastern Cape region. How might this affect the range and systems of the Karoo, of the Nama Karoo? There's really remarkably little experimental data to go on to come to any sort of answer for these range and systems, in contrast to thousands of studies carried out worldwide on warming effects on plants. One of the very few studies conducted in Southern Africa is by Musil et al., published in 2005, and a couple of related studies that showed that warming in the succulent Karoo might cause really high levels of mortality in small-bodied succulent species of this biome. But can these results be applied to Nama Karoo systems, where the flora comprises several species with very large ranges, and presumably higher degrees of resilience in response to warming and drought? Another thing to note about the Musil et al. Study is that the open-top chamber system that they used really caused quite extreme warming during the day, with parts of their chamber warming by up to 8 degrees, just below 8 degrees, and the middle of the chamber well higher than 5 degrees. So this is really quite an extreme warming pulse to be applying to these small-bodied succulents. When you model the range of Eriocephalus ericoides using a niche modeling approach, a simple methods that are quite widely used in this area of work, filled with assumptions, of course. But applying a model like this, we get results that look something like this. The original range of the species given in purple, and then a projected range for a fairly low emission scenario given in orange. And where the two ranges overlap, we have this brown color. So we see that the species is projected even with a low emission scenario. So this is even lower than the 4.5 that we talked about earlier. We see the species seems sensitive to warming and drying in the western and northern parts of its range, but it retains its core range very successfully and potentially even increases its range towards the cooler eastern regions of its current range. And Middleburg seems to be an area where it would at least retain its range. So given this projection, we'd expect the mild warming of a scenario like this to possibly even be of benefit to a species like Eriocephalus ericoides. But we don't really know. And that's why we decided to go ahead and start doing some fieldwork to figure it out. So we decided to warm the species under field conditions to test how its productivity and growth might respond to a mild level of warming. And the method we used was to construct 6 pentagonal chambers large enough to surround a single shrub with some surrounding competing vegetation. And we distributed these warming chambers throughout the paddock, and we had 6 control chambers, 6 control plots that were unchambered and not paired, but scattered randomly between the 6 treatment plots. So that was the design. The chambers were much larger than those of Musil. And in order to avoid excessive daytime warming further, we lined the bottom of each chamber with these pipes filled with water and painted black. And the idea is that during the day, the sun's radiation heats up the pipes and prevents an excessive daytime warming. And then at night, that radiation is released back into these chambers, causing some passive nighttime warming. So, which would be very expensive to achieve using energy or using electrical energy. So this is a fairly inexpensive way of getting daytime and nighttime warming. The measurements that Amy did were to look at biomass gain by sampling the shoot extension of replicate shoots, monitored monthly, looking at length extension, stem thickness, and leaf numbers, and then working out biomass gain by an allometric relationship with the species. Shoot photosynthesis using a Lycor 6400 XT photosynthesis system, measured 2 hourly, monthly through the day with a standardized light level. Plant water potential using a dew point hygrometer on plant leaf material monthly, and then soil water, logging data continuously and then manually sampling to increase representation on a monthly basis. Our predicted outcomes were that warming would enhance photosynthetic activity and shoot growth in the shoulder seasons, especially when we expected growth to be temperature limited, but possibly to reduce shoot growth in the peak summer due to excessive heat stress. And we predicted that water availability would modify the warming response, enhancing photosynthetic and growth response due to increased plant water status. Very briefly, the chambers had their desired effect. Here we see Amy doing a little bit of maintenance in the field on one of her chambers. And this is the monthly warming applied by the chambers. Turns out to be around 1 degree on average. It fluctuates from month to month. So these are mean monthly temperature changes in the chambers. There were some interesting diurnal effects. In summertime, we do get a peak similar to what Musil found, but you can see the peak only goes to about 2.5 degrees as opposed to 5 or 8, depending on where you measure, given here in the Musil graph. So a much more mild level of warming, and we see some strong nighttime warming caused by re-radiation from the pipes, especially in winter, less so in summer. So the chambers seem to work reasonably well. Just a quick check on the impact of chambers on soil moisture. We had a number of sensors buried in the plots in control, the C, and in the warmed chambers. And we can see that the soil moisture responds similarly to rainfall inputs over this period of time. Rainfall events, the soil moisture responds, and there doesn't appear to be an effect of chambers on intercepting soil moisture. So all in all, reasonably pleasing performance by the chambers. Now, what about effects? The effects on photosynthesis they are difficult to tease out statistically because the species is very hard to work on and get an accurate measurement of leaf area. But here's the equipment we used to do the measurements, and we can see that there seems to be a tendency towards increased photosynthetic rate in summer months in the warmed plots, but nothing really going on in winter in terms of warming, but we do see appreciable photosynthetic rates in winter. So the species remains active during winter, but you get a strong warming effect in summer on photosynthesis. Also quite interesting diurnal patterns. And what we see is in summer months, the species is more active in the late afternoon and less active at midday. And it's the opposite in winter, where the species is most active around midday and in the morning, when presumably it's a little bit warmer. So interesting seasonal changes in the diurnal pattern of photosynthesis here. But when it comes to growth, we see some very strong and positive effects of warming. Highly significant statistically. The summer months, we see a big increase in shoot biomass gain, but this switches off in winter. It's not like photosynthesis where you still see some growth going on. Growth definitely switches off even in the shoulder season and is dissipated by then completely. So all the action here in summer, where the plant grows and where we get this warming effect. We also related the plant water potential to the soil water content to have a look at whether soil water was having an effect. And this is the results we got. Soil water content measured volumetrically and plant water potential here measured with the hygrometer. And we can see that when soil moisture is above about 3.5% gravimetric, the plants are at their most optimal water status. And then they get pretty water stressed down here. So even when they're very water stressed, they're still showing photosynthesis, because we always got positive photosynthesis. But this is where the action was really happening. And if we partition the growth data between these two periods, when soil moisture is below 3.5 and above 3.5, we see that the range of shoot growth measured is always positive above 3.5 and is always tends towards the negative below 3.5. So this particular point here seems to really represent a switch for growth, and it's reflected here in the plant water potential data as well. So this is I think quite a useful piece of information which will allow us to model the growth of the species. Finally, we were able to plot the biomass gain per shoot against the average air temperature of every month in which we measured growth and temperature. And the black line gives the overall pattern for warming and control chambers, or plots, and it's highly significantly positive. And we get it's a straight line. It doesn't seem to be saturating. So this species is on its way up as the average air temperature warms. Interestingly, when you partition the data into heated and control, or warmed and control, the two lines are parallel and offset. And what this means is that there's likely a chamber effect. So if there was no chamber effect, you'd expect this red line and blue line to lie on top of one another, and the red just to extend up here and the blue to extend down here. So this offset implies a chamber effect, probably an effect of lower wind speed in the chambers, or possibly a reduction in competition from surrounding plants. We're not quite sure, but suffice to say that we can detect it, and it's important to make note of it. But overall, it doesn't appear to have a massive effect on the overall warming effect and the overall warming trend that we find. So that's quite a robust result. So to summarize briefly, warming stimulates growth of Eriocephalus ericoides at Middleburg. Not quite as we predicted. We don't get an extended growing season. Rather, we get this on-off switch and you get more growth in summer. There's no effect of excessive heat stress, in other words. Soil and plant water status appear to be critical for shoot growth and the warming response, less so for carbon gain. So it shows that the species is much more resilient in terms of carbon gain across a wide range of temperature, soil and plant water status. It's really important for understanding carbon sequestration of these systems for future work on the carbon budget and those sorts of issues, mitigation issues. And overall, we say that mild warming is unlikely to harm the species in these sorts of areas and may in fact benefit them, especially if rainfall is maintained. Thanks very much for listening.
Good day, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Londi Mokwena, and I am a master's student at the University of Witwatersrand. And today I will be sharing with you one of my chapters in my master's dissertation titled Investigating the Impacts of Physiological Drought Responses in Perennial South African Seafoam Grasses. Changes in temperature and rainfall that are linked to global climate change are predicted to cause an increase in the duration and severity of droughts, resulting in the possibility of water becoming even scarcer in some environments. The ability of grasses to cope with drought is essential in predicting how grass species will survive and perform during more frequent and extreme droughts that are predicted to come with global change. Physiological drought tolerance is a measure of the degree of water stress a plant can endure without losing hydraulic capacity. Physiologically, drought-tolerant plants can function at lower water potential as compared to others. Grass species regulate their stomata differently under water stress through ranges of ecophysiological regulations. Some grasses can maintain stomatal conductance at lower soil water potential than others, but with an increased risk. And when the atmospheric demand becomes greater than the supply of water from the soil, grasses will lower their water loss by closing their stomata. However, closing stomata will result in the loss of photosynthesis because there is a trade-off between water loss and growth. There is a great deal of knowledge of the physiological consequences of drought and the variety of strategies different plants use to tolerate droughts. However, seafoam grasses represent an intriguing challenge in this regard because their unique life histories and the seasonally arid environments they live in mean they do not necessarily conform to a classic theory. Moreover, research into drought responses in grasses has yet to integrate understanding of its impacts on other aspects of seafoam grass biology. The aim of the study was to describe the range of drought strategies shown by some seafoam grass species by quantifying the different drought strategies that they use. This was done by firstly determining at what plant water potentials do different grass species close their stomata during a drought, to what degree do different grass species osmotically adjust during a drought, and lastly, do different grass species cure faster than others when exposed to a drought. We selected 13 perennial tufted seafoam grass species. Each species replicated 25 times, making a total of 325 individual pots. The grass pots were placed under a drought experiment used in a greenhouse at the University of Pretoria Experimental Farm for a period of 6 months. Drought tolerance of the grasses is the leaf water potential at which the stomatal conductance fell below an ecological threshold for functioning was measured by taking daily stomatal conductance, soil moisture content, leaf water potential, and chlorophyll content throughout the drought. The drought had an effect on all the selected grass species, and the response to the drought varied from species to species, which indicates to us that the grass species fall under different categories of drought strategies that they use. The drought affected stomatal conductance, and the grass species also all closed their stomates at different rates. Some species such as Poenicum, Lodacea, and Melanus repens closed their stomates way earlier as compared to others, while some species such as the Digitaria and Euochlora who kept their stomach open until later in the drought. This is because stomatal closure is a common response of avoiding water deficit in seafoam grasses. Once grasses reach a low stomatal conductance, they lose the ability to conduct water at higher leaf water potential. This can be observed in the following graphs, which show water potential threshold at stomatal closure for each species. We can also observe in the second graph that the drop in water potential as soil moisture content decreases also varies from species to species. Turgor loss point is a negative water potential at which the leaf cell loses turgor and the leaf wilts and stomata close and close stomata. Pressure volume curves are also used to measure how grass leaves respond to changes in water potential. The turgor loss point also represents the soil water potential, whereby the plant cannot take up enough water to recover from wilting. Turgor leaf potential is lowered when the soil dries, and this alters the relationship between leaf water potential and leaf turgor potential for stomatal closure. This can occur through osmotic adjustment, which is a process where the plant adjusts salinity. Plants that osmotically adjust have a more negative turgor loss point and are able to maintain both stomatal and hydraulic conductance. During the experimental drought, I did some pressure volume curves to measure to what degree do these different grass species osmotically adjust. And the adjustment is observed by the differences in the slopes of the pre-drought and during the drought of each species. We can see that different species osmotically adjust during the drought. Some species adjust more than others. There is a trade-off between growth and photosynthetic rate and the ability to deal with stress that each species makes when they are experiencing drought stress. As the plants close their stomata when decreasing water potential, there is a decline of stomatal conductance and reduced photosynthesis. This results in some species retaining their leaf materials, while others cure or let their leaves die. I measured the number of dead leaves as the soil moisture content dropped daily during the drought, and it is observed by the slopes that some species cured faster than others. This is also correlated with the rate at which chlorophyll content is lost during the drought from each species. We can yet again see differences in the slopes of each species, showing that some are curing faster than others. We can then conclude that drought strategies of perennial C4 grasses range between two drought strategies. The first strategy being some plants are water saving, they maintain a high water potential, low curing rate, and they close their stomata early during the drought. While the second strategy is that some species are water spending, they maintain a low water potential and a high curing rate, and prolong opening of the stomata during the drought.
Greetings from Texas. I am Urs Kreuter, and I'm a professor in the Department of Ecology and Conservation Biology at Texas A&M University. My co-author is Carissa Wonka, who's one of my former graduate students and is now a research scientist with the U.S. Department of Agricultural Research Services in Sydney, Montana. Today, I will present some results of research conducted in my lab during the last 15 years on the human dimensions of prescribed fire. Specifically, my presentation will focus on the social barriers to the use of prescribed fire as a wildfire mitigation tool in the southern plains of the United States of America. First, I will present an overarching schematic that links the social and regulatory factors affecting prescribed fire by landowners in the southern plains. Regulatory drivers occur at the national, state, and county levels and are determined by policymakers, county commissioners, and district court judges. Collectively, these regulatory factors represent constraints that affect social drivers by influencing subjective norms regarding the application of fire, which may either hinder or support the use of this land management tool. Areas in which there has been a lack of information include: first, the effects of social factors, including skills and resources, as well as subjective norms on landowners' decisions regarding the application of prescribed fire. Second, the potential effect of district court judges' prescribed fire perceptions on the use of this tool. This is important because these judges would preside over escape fire cases. Third, the potential effect of prescribed fire perceptions of county commissioners. This is important because they are responsible for implementing burn bans. Next, I will present research results that address some social factors influencing the application of prescribed fire. Research published by David Toledo in 2013 found that landowners' attitudes in Texas about the use of prescribed fire were positively associated with, first, subjective norms, which are represented by decision support from neighbors, family, and friends. Second, risk-taking orientation of the landowner. And third, previous experience with prescribed fire. There were also indirect effects on attitude through the interaction of these factors, but due to time constraints, I will not cover them today. A primary implication of these results is that there is a need for targeted engagement strategies to create pro-fire subjective norms and address landowners' concerns regarding the use of prescribed fire. Next, I will address issues relating to the use of prescribed fire based on research that we published in 2008 and 2019. First, we found that a primary inhibitor for the use of prescribed fire is the widespread lack of knowledge, resources, and planning capacity to apply this tool safely. Second, and very importantly, we also discovered that fear of liability for escape fire is a key inhibitor of prescribed fire use by landowners. It is important to note here that in the United States, the initiator of prescribed fire is solely responsible, subject to the legal statutes of each state, for damages caused by escape fire. This differs substantially from other countries where landowners are responsible for inhibiting the spread of fire onto and across their land. Third, our results also found that burn bans are, not surprisingly but problematically, an inhibitor of prescribed fire use during periods when the application of fire most effectively reduces fuel loads and invasive woody plants. Before presenting any more research results, I will briefly focus on liability standards for escape fire in the United States. First is strict liability, which I will not discuss further because it applies only to two states, Minnesota and Wisconsin, where prescribed fire is rarely used. Simple negligence is the most commonly applied standard, including in the Southern Plains states of Oklahoma and Texas. Under the statute, those who implement prescribed fire must practice reasonable care when doing so. The term reasonable care is, of course, open to legal interpretation, which has led to uncertainty about the likely outcome in escape fire cases. Gross negligence is being adopted by increasingly more states in the country, including Florida and Georgia. Under this statute, prescribed fire implementers must follow explicit guidelines when applying fire. And in an escape fire case, plaintiffs must show reckless disregard of the duty of care owed others by the prescribed burner. If found to be grossly negligent, then the burner is generally judged under simple negligence rules. To determine the effect of prevailing civil liability standards on the use of prescribed fire, Carissa Wonka compared the frequency and extent of prescribed fire application in adjoining counties across state lines and that were differentiated by simple and gross negligence standards. She found that landowners in counties with gross negligence standards applied more prescribed fire and burned more frequently than landowners in counties with simple negligence standards. This implies that in order to develop a pro-fire culture, states with simple negligence statutes should consider the benefits of a lower legal liability standard together with explicit safe burning regulatory requirements. I will now focus on recent research conducted to ascertain the perceptions of district court judges and county commissioners about prescribed fire. Since district court judges preside over escape fire cases, we conducted a survey of 200 judges in the Southern Plains to determine their perception about this land management tool. Specifically, we asked them to identify factors that they would consider evidence of negligence under simple and gross negligence standards. In the graph, the negligence factors are listed on the vertical axis, and the blue and beige bars represent the frequency of selection by judges of these factors under simple and gross negligence, respectively. Our results show that judges from both states cited fewer factors as evidence of gross negligence than simple negligence. This suggests that adopting gross negligence standards could lead to more favorable judgments for prescribed burners in cases of escape fire, provided that they had adhered to prescribed guidelines. In turn, this would encourage more widespread use of this tool. Additionally, few judges reported being familiar with prescribed fire. This suggests that providing judges the opportunity to experience prescribed fire could encourage them to adopt a more favorable impression of this land management tool. Since county commissioners are responsible for enacting and repealing county-wide bans on outdoor burning, we also conducted a survey of 400 commissioners in the Southern Plains to determine their perceptions about prescribed fire. Contrary to the judges, most commissioners were familiar with prescribed fire, and almost all had enacted a burn ban at least once. Importantly, most commissioners used objective metrics such as high fire danger indices to enact the burn ban, and most commissioners obtained information to make decisions about burn bans from fire officials, indicating that such officials are a key factor in burn ban implementation. Since county commissioners are elected officials, we also asked them if a shift from simple to gross negligence would affect their decisions regarding the enactment of burn bans. Most indicated this shift would not affect the frequency of burn ban enactment. Of the respondents who said the shift would likely affect burn ban frequency, more Oklahoma commissioners indicated it would reduce burn bans, while more Texas commissioners indicated it would increase burn bans. This difference in response between the two states may be ascribed to the previously documented stronger pro-burning culture in Oklahoma, whereas in Texas the relaxation of the negligence standards for escape fire may be seen as increasing the risk of escape fire. Lastly, I will focus on prescribed burning associations. These represent a voluntary membership mechanism for promoting the broader use of safely applied prescribed fire. Prescribed burning associations reduce prescribed fire risk by improving knowledge and skills through peer-to-peer fire safety training, and they also reduce costs by providing shared labor and fire management equipment. By reducing risk and promoting the use of prescribed fire, prescribed burning associations may also increase the demand for and facilitate access to escape fire insurance. Additionally, prescribed burning associations may also be able to alleviate factors that produce subjective norms and that hinder rather than promote the use of prescribed fire. In part, this may be achieved by engaging county fire officials, county commissioners, and district court judges during prescribed fire events to educate them about the benefits of fire and the need for trained burn managers to be able to apply fire during burn bans when fuel loads and invasive woody plants can be most effectively controlled with fire. Finally, through their networks, prescribed burn associations could facilitate statutory reform to implement right-to-burn acts and prescribed fire regulation that help reduce fire risk. To end my presentation, I will provide some take-home pointers. Firstly, to reduce accumulated fuel loads and wildfire risk on private land in the Southern Plains, widespread periodic use of prescribed fire is critical. However, the use of prescribed fire by landowners is influenced by subjective norms that are often driven by negative public opinion regarding this land management tool. Moreover, civil liability standards for escape fire affect the incidence of prescribed fire use also. Gross negligence standards tend to lead to broader use of this land management tool than simple negligence standards. County commissioners and district court judges' attitudes about prescribed fire may also affect its use at times when it is most effective for fuel load reduction. Therefore, more lenient judgments and allowance for more burn ban exemptions could enhance the use of prescribed fire when it is most effective for fuel load reduction and therefore wildfire mitigation. Lastly, prescribed burning associations should be established more widely to help change the perspective of landowners, county officials and policymakers, and the public about the use of prescribed fire as a critically important wildfire mitigation tool, and also to enable the adoption of right to burn acts. I would like to acknowledge the following sources of funding for the research presented in my talk. First, the U.S. Department of Agricultural Natural Resources Conservation Service Conservation Innovation Grant Program. Second, the National Science Foundation Dynamics of Coupled Human and Natural Systems Program. And most recently, the Bureau of Land Management Joint Fire Sciences Program. I thank you for your attention, and I wish you a good day.